Hello and welcome to One Man Think Tank. Today we're going to have a little bit of a discussion on the post office, or rather the privatization of it. What happens if it runs out of money, etc., etc., etc. Because I've been seeing a lot of articles about that, and during coronavirus you don't get to talk about much. So the fixation on the post office is a nice little policy debate for everyone to have, while nothing much can be done about it in the very short term. Also, sorry about the visuals, or lack thereof. Normally I like to provide a level of visual entertainment, I guess, with each of these, but unfortunately I'm just kind of throwing this together with the audio, and we'll put up a nice picture, maybe a postal cartoon that's not too libertarian. Who knows? Or one about the Postal Service is running out of money. We need to write a letter. Why don't you just email them? I've seen that cartoon about 8 times when I was looking for a thumbnail. Anywho, as you've probably heard, the post office is in dire straits. Everyone and everything about it is going to end. The government's going to privatize it. One of the few very progressive things in the United States, a state-run postal service, will be over, and we will officially have drifted into third world status. That's not the full story. Let's talk about the facts, then I'll talk about what will actually happen if the post office were to run out of money. So, first, the post office currently was expected to run out of money by, I believe, either 2021 or 2024, depending on the projection. By run out of money, we mean it's so much debt it's impossible to pay it back, and they'd have to start laying people off or cutting service. We'll get back to that in a moment. But what's happened with coronavirus is there's been such a drop in people using the postal service. Whether it's businesses shipping things, or people mailing letters, or you name it. They have seen a loss of, I believe, $18 billion right now, and they are projecting this will end up increasing both with debt and with just continued losses to be about $53 billion. That's really bad for a business, especially the post office, because while it's been running a deficit, one, it's been a congressional imposed deficit with the pension pre-funding requirements. We can talk about that in a different video, but basically the post office theoretically is actually profitable right now. But also the fact that it's a lot of money. And historically, the federal government has provided the post office with low-interest loans or bailouts to get out of this. A few times they've done bailouts, but usually the post office goes without federal money. Now, what the federal government did with the big CARES Act, the big coronavirus bill they put through, is they've provided, after some weird negotiations, the Postal Service with a $10 billion loan from the Treasury, which the Treasury hasn't given out yet. The initial response will just to be giving them access to the loan, by the way. But that's not enough to cover what they have, and also a loan is still a loan. You have to pay it back. We're essentially transferring their debts from the Postal Service to the Treasury, and they'd still have to pay it back. It's a whole mess of things. Basically, the post office is running out of money in the sense of the 2021/2024 deadline for, okay, we're officially destitute, has been moved up. This isn't new information. The post office has always needed fixing, so it's not something where if coronavirus goes away, all of a sudden the post office is hunky-dory again. Second, what the post office has requested. The post office has requested $75 billion. $25 billion in loans, $25 billion for modernization, and $25 billion in just debt forgiveness, no strings attached money. Overall, for a federal agency, this is not a bad request. But let's take this breakdown further. So $25 billion is for modernization. That's something they normally request. So we're going to actually remove that. So the post office really needs $50 billion. They should get $100 billion. They've asked for $75 billion, and they really need $50 billion. Now, Congress has, theoretically, on that sort of loan front, offered them $10 billion of the $25 billion. Lots of numbers here, but basically, look at it this way. What the post office really still needs is $25 billion in cash and $15 billion in loans now. And Trump has said he'll veto any bill that comes to him with money for the post office. We'll see if that holds. This is usually one of those threats that doesn't make it past the bill drafting stage. So, on to the actual bill. This battle's going to be undertaken in the next coronavirus package, colloquially called CARES 2 right now. This will not be discussed until Congress is fully back in session, I believe, early May. I don't think they're back for the entirety of April. So this is going to be one of those discussions where we just see a bunch of spinning in the mud, because no one can really do anything. And the real reason why the post office is being defunded by the Republicans right now, or refusing to fund, because technically they're not defunding, is because they don't want mail-in voting. That's what this is. To explain, first-class mail, the letters you send and all that jazz, have to be sent by the U.S. Postal Service. FedEx can't send them, UPS can't send them. The post office has a monopoly on those. That's how the post office stays afloat for the most part, and why their universal service is so good. Because then anyone can send and receive letters without any interference, basically, or prohibitive costs. So for mail-in voting, you need to use the Postal Service, because it is a ballot, so first-class mail. Now, if the post office runs out of money, you can't send the mail. So the real question is not, in many ways, can the post office stay afloat? They're still going to run into this funding problem until one of two things happens. The pension pre-funding requirement is removed, and the U.S. Postal Service gets addition and gets some sort of form of dedicated funding, or it's turned back into a cabinet department like it was pre-1970. There are pros and cons to doing that. The biggest pro being it's a lot harder to privatize a government department than it is an independent agency. But more on that at a different point. So the post office is running out of cash. When does it run out of cash? You're seeing a lot of people going, it's gonna be June! June's when it's all over! It's not June, for the record. It is going to be September, is what the post office has said. Two senators, I believe both the senators from Virginia actually, said June is when we're starting to look into the danger zone of things. The post office did their own study, came out with their own numbers and said it's actually going to be September. So the real question here, like I said, is not, can we completely eliminate the post office debt right now, in the most practical sense? It's, can we keep the post office running until November? Running at its current capacity until November. And that's the question the Democrats are trying to sort out. They're going to try and give the post office all the money they want, and the Republicans will try and give them nothing. I think the end result will most likely be they end up giving the post office enough to make it to another year, basically, will be the end result. So maybe $15 billion to make up for what they've lost currently, plus they give them the remaining $15 billion in loans. Then the post office is able to stay afloat until June, July. The election's already happened, so everyone can either fully fund it or make a serious attempt to privatize it at that point. But what happens if the post office runs out of money? What happens if the worst case scenario happens? Treasury doesn't give them the loan, and Congress doesn't give them any funding. For some reason, everyone's response to this is, well, they'll just privatize the post office. This is the big Republican plan. Defund, then privatize. You can't... this shows a very limited knowledge on how privatization works. It's not just, oh, it's our money. Okay, here you go, private agencies, all yours. No, what will happen is the post office will have to cut service. That's what their warning is, not that they will close down well, They'll close down entirely if they run out of money, but what they're saying is we'll be running out of money in September, so what we'll need to do is cut people before then. That's part of what the June warning was about. So that would mean cutting things like Saturday service, or firing a certain number of postal workers, closing some post offices. The beginning steps to privatization. You see, the post office, UPS as we know it, USPS as we know it, was created by the Postal Reorganization Act of 1970. And what that means is it is created by Congress, so only Congress can destroy it. And right now, the House is not going to get rid of the Postal Service. So any talks of privatization are, for the most part, null and void. The mandate is protected by the Universal Provision Mandate, as well as their monopoly on postal letters is protected by that bill. So in order for that to be removed, Congress would have to pass a bill removing it. And to privatize the whole agency would require Congress, privatizing the whole agency via bill. Trump can't just go, okay, the post office is privatized. If he could do that, every single independent agency would have been privatized back during Bush or Reagan. That's not what's happening right now. And people typically mistake deregulation, which is what Reagan did, what Bush did, what Trump has done, with privatization. Deregulation just removes the federal government's power to tell private companies, no, don't do that. Privatization takes a federal or a public asset and makes it a private company, which usually requires an act of Congress or significant willpower on the president's part and a lot of legal loopholes. So what we're looking at is not a post office that's going to be non-existent if we hit September. What we'll be looking at is a severely cut back post office, a weakened post office that will be easier to argue for privatization, because getting those services back will require giving the post office additional funding. That's what this argument is about. Don't mistake these arguments about, oh, they got privatized the post office or it's going to turn off. That's not what's happening. The post office is not shutting down. It would just get weaker. That is bad, but it is not, for lack of a better term, worth the response of, oh God, it's going to be all over when it comes to September. Not to mention there are severe repercussions to the Republicans' donors if the post office shuts down. Everyone benefits from cheap mail service, and while they may have certain things they want privatized, or have access to, maybe some more mail delivery, they're not going to get that in this case. Closing down the post office hurts them too. This is essentially a big spat over vote by mail, and Republicans doing whatever they can to try and stop it. And honestly, it's looking like, for the most part, this big coronavirus thing will kind of be over by late July. By kind of, I mean there will be resurgences, additional spikes, but for the majority of Americans, they'll have either gotten it or be in the immune enough category that they can get it and just live through it, for lack of a better term, reopening the economy, causing people to go polling places, etc., etc. So I think this is going to end up being more of a, for lack of a better term, nothing burger than it actually is. But the big argument here, and what you need to keep in mind, and what we can learn from this as a progressive, socialist, whatever you want to call it, movement, is simple. The privatization of anything, not just the post office, is really hard to do without full control of Congress. That is our incentive to keep the Democrats in the House, or even in the Senate, or in the presidency, whatever. Someone who can stop privatization. Yes, I know there are problems with Democrats. It's not what we're talking about today. But privatization, once a service has been nationalized, is much harder than we make it sound. So keep that in mind. Especially when we're thinking about calls to nationalize airlines and such, or privatize Amtrak. There's a reason these things have not been done by people who would clearly benefit from doing them. And that's all I have to say on this matter. If you liked the video, please leave a like down below, and while you're down there, drop a comment. If you wish to see more from this channel, please click the subscribe button and the notification bell. Otherwise, as always, have a wonderful day.